Questions indeed arise as to whether or not Chen was pressured to leave the U.S. compound. A CNN interview reported by The Atlantic says, and I quote, Chen's comments portray the United States as manipulating him, cutting him off from outside communication, and encouraging him to leave the embassy rather than seek asylum. He says he was denied his request to call friends. He said he felt the embassy officials had lied to him, says the report. The embassy kept lobbying me, it goes on to say, to leave and promise to have people stay with me in the hospital. But this afternoon, as soon as I checked into the hospital room, I noticed they were all gone. I'm very disappointed at the U.S. government. I don't think U.S. officials protected human rights in this case. When asked why he had left the embassy rather than staying and perhaps seeking asylum, the article goes on, Chen seems to blame the embassy officials. At the time, I didn't have a lot of information. I wasn't allowed to call my friends from inside the embassy. I couldn't keep up with the news, so I didn't know a lot of things that were happening. Like I said, there were many questions. And next week, I hope to convene another hearing of this commission on Chen in order to take testimony from the Obama administration witnesses and to get some answers.
While details are still emerging, it appears that the most generous read of the administration's handling of this case is that it was naive in accepting assurances from a government that has a well-known and documented history of brutally repressing its own people under this government. This February, the Chinese government went so far as to deny a visa to Susan Johnson Cook, the U.S. ambassador for international freedom. The very time the vice president of China was meeting with the president of the United States, President Obama, the president's ambassador for human rights and religious freedom, Susan Johnson Cook, couldn't even get a visa to go to China. And of course, there in China is the barbaric practice of forced abortions and sterilization, and very abusive, which Chen has sought to shine a bright light on. The list goes on. In short, Chen's case is not an anomaly, but symptomatic of pervasive human rights abuses committed by the Chinese government against its own people. In light of the realities and the newly emerging accounts of how Chen's wife was treated in the days following his escape, notably that Chinese officials detained her, threatened to beat her to death if Chen did not leave the U.S. embassy, it is hard to comprehend why the administration would accept at face value assurances that Chen would be safe upon exiting U.S. protection. You wonder if there were other forces at work. Had word come down from on high to resolve the Chen situation no matter what, prior to the arrivals of the Secretaries Clinton and Geithner, who were headed to Beijing this week for high-level economic and foreign policy talk? Was there even a hint of coercion? Was there any coercion, subtle coercion, forced coercion, or pressure involved? What were the internal State Department and White House deliberations? When the dust settles, I intend to formally request to review all cable traffic, classified or otherwise, that surrounded these negotiations. Further, the administration has an obligation to release the details of the deal that was struck with the Chinese government, especially given how quickly it appears to have unraveled. It has been reported that Chen was told that the U.S. government officials would stay with him at the hospital, and yet, according to one news account, Chen said, quote, many Americans were with me while I checked into the hospital, and doctors examined me, lots of them, but when I was brought to the hospital room, they all left. I don't know where they went. Was Chen deceived? Was that part of the arrangement? If not, why not? If so, why did Chen find himself alone, isolated, and fearful just hours after he left U.S. protection? The administration, the Obama administration, has a high moral obligation to protect Chen and his family. To do anything less would be scandalous. America missed an opportunity in Tiananmen. Will this administration too fail to seize a historic moment? The reverberations of such failure are nearly impossible to calculate. The world is watching, both dictators and dissidents. The administration must be bold. The administration must ensure Chen's safety and that of his family. If news reports are to be believed about Chen's wishes, the administration must grant him and his family asylum and refuse to apologize despite a Chinese government demand. Throughout history, America's embassies have been islands of freedom. Recall the group of Pentecostals known as the Siberian Seven, who, seeking religious freedom and the right to emigrate, lived in the U.S. Embassy in Moscow for 5 years beginning 1978. No one in the Carter administration, no one in the Reagan administration had said they had to leave. No one negotiated and said, go out and be on your own on Moscow. They allowed them to stay 5 years.
According to the U.S. State Department and the U.S. Embassy in Beijing and the official Chinese announcement, Chen Guangcheng left the embassy of his own volition. However, according to my conversation last night with Mr. Chen and several media reports, including the Associated Press and first-hand information from Chen's friend and fellow lawyer like Tong Biao, and from Deng Jinyan, the wife of dissident Hu Ya, the U.S. officials relayed to Chen the threat made by the Chinese side to threaten his wife, Yuan Weijing. And it was after learning of this threat that Chen was left with no choice but to reluctantly leave the U.S. Embassy. I have a few questions, want to ask the U.S. chief negotiator or whoever led that. Who is the one relayed that information to Chen? What exactly the wording from the Chinese government? And what's the U.S. response initially to that message by the Chinese government? And why he has to walk on May the 2nd? Why that day? And why there's no other option on the table offered to Chen? For instance, why the U.S. Embassy would not tell Chen that you have a choice, that you can stay, we can continue to negotiate with the Chinese government to allow your wife and 2 children to come to the U.S. Embassy so that you can have a safe environment to discuss your future. I think Secretary Clinton, this is the moment, I think, to deliver, at least to deliver what you have promised, and what you have repeatedly said in the past 2 years. She wants to see Chen and his family with freedom and safety. As you are visiting and dialogue with your counterparts in China, this is the moment to deliver. I think Chen specifically made that appeal to Secretary Clinton to help negotiate, I think to re-engage with the Chinese government, to allow them to have a safe exit.
I don't see any particular reason why Secretary Clinton, Secretary Geithner, Ambassador Locke, and other senior U.S. government officials who are in Beijing at the moment can't get in the car and go to the hospital and insist on access to him.
Mr. Chairman, even if I didn't care one iota for human rights in China, for Chen, and all I cared about was the agenda that Secretary Geithner is pursuing at his visit, I would be emphasizing the Chen Guangcheng case, because that's what puts China on the defensive. It's not our weakness, it's their weakness. And Ronald Reagan understood that when he dealt with the Pentecostals. As George Shultz had said, every time the Russians wanted to negotiate nuclear weapons policies, he'd say, well, what are you doing about this dissident and that dissident, and when are they getting out? And when they began to understand that these dissidents were not in the way of American foreign policy, but that they were foreign policy, guess what? Ronald Reagan was able to negotiate a better deal on weapons. These people who've been negotiating have held the life and the safety and the security of these heroes in their hands. How sad it makes me at the sheer, utter incompetence of the people at the State Department who purported to bargain.
I've been following Twitter's Chinese community. These are people who are living in China, but have the technical savviness to climb the wall and are very active on Twitter. I want to give the hearing a little bit of idea. I want you to know, because it's utmost important to know, that what are the reactions after Chen Guangcheng left the embassy. Now, overwhelming disbelief at how this could have happened, overwhelming anger, and sense of a betrayal. Now, for 6 days, 美国大使馆, 5 characters in Chinese, meaning U.S. Embassy. These 5 characters for 6 days are magic words for many Chinese. China is a big country, and this one island, one safe haven called U.S. Embassy. We're so overjoyed that he got there, so miraculously. And yet we dropped the ball so awful, so terribly. We allowed this to happen. China's pro-democracy citizens, whether they are outspoken or not, are look upon the U.S. for support. If we failed Chen Guangcheng, this deals a horrible, horrible blow for this population that are braving persecution for change in China for the better, and that we will suffer the pain for years and years to come, and we will lose all credibility. I mean, may I read a few quotes I took from Twitter. Number 1, very straightforward. The U.S. betrayed us. Number 2, Obama has no teeth. Number 3, this is so recklessly cynical. Number 4, now that we can't even trust the U.S. Embassy, I can't tell you how angry I am. Number 4, in 2012, the entire human race is unable to rescue a blind man. Where are we? Where are we standing with? Who are we standing with?